A Christmas party, 500 people, champagne and white lights and the kind of noise that fills a room without warming it. Then a man sat down at a piano no one had touched in years. He played one song, just one, and across the lobby, a woman who ran a $200 million company stopped breathing. Not because the music was beautiful, because it was impossible. That song existed in one place only, inside her. A secret from 18 years ago, a dead man's final gift. Something no living person should have known. She came down the stairs. She asked him where he learned it. He said something that wasn't an answer. And the next morning, when she sent someone to find him, they discovered he had moved his daughter out of their apartment 3 days before the party. Before she ever spoke to him, before she ever asked. He had already been ready to disappear. The lobby smelled like cinnamon and money. Caleb noticed that every year. The way Whitfield Capital transformed itself each December into something that almost looked warm. White lights wrapped around marble pillars. A tree so tall it grazed the second-floor railing. Champagne glasses catching the chandelier glow like little fires held in careful hands. Pretty, expensive, and not 1 inch of it meant for him. He held Ray's hand tighter than he needed to. She didn't mind. She was too busy staring at the chocolate fountain near the east wall, her mouth slightly open, her eyes doing that thing they did when she encountered something she had never seen before and immediately needed to possess. 8 years old, and she still looked at the world like it owed her a miracle. He loved that about her. Loved it and ached over it in equal measure, because the world didn't owe anyone anything. He knew that now. He'd learned it the hard way, the way most men learn the things that matter. Not in a classroom, not from a book. On a stage floor in Cleveland with half a ton of steel on his hand. But that was 12 years ago. Tonight was just a Christmas party. He kept telling himself that. Caleb Hart was 38 years old and he looked it. Not badly. Just in the way that men look when they've been carrying something heavy for a long time and have gotten very good at not letting it show. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there at 30. A set to his jaw that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with habit. His work shirt was faded. The elbows worn thin. His boots were clean, at least. He'd made sure of that. For Ray, she was wearing her good dress. The blue one with the small buttons down the front. Claire had picked it out 2 Christmases before she got too sick to shop. He didn't tell Ray that. He just buttoned it carefully that morning and said she looked beautiful and meant every word. 3 years at Whitfield Capital. That was how long he'd been doing this. Fixing things. Pipes. Vents. Electrical panels on the 14th floor that kept tripping for no reason anyone could explain. He was good at it. Good enough that his supervisor Ron had stopped checking his work 2 years ago and just handed him the keys. Caleb didn't mind. He needed the job the way a man needs air, specifically. Without negotiation, the benefits package at Whitfield Capital was the best in the city. That was the only reason he was here, had always been the only reason. The name on the building meant something different to him than it meant to everyone else in this room. To them it was prestige, success, 3 generations of real estate money, a name you saw on plaques and lobby directories and the occasional newspaper profile. To Caleb it was the name on the settlement check, $75,000, signed by a man he'd never met, for a hand that would never work right again. He had cashed that check at a bank 2 blocks from the hospital. Then he had sat in his car for 40 minutes and done nothing. Then he had driven home and told himself that chapter was done. He was going to put it down and not pick it back up. He had mostly kept that promise. Mostly. Ray tugged his hand. She had spotted the dessert table and was vibrating with urgency the way only children can vibrate. A full-body declaration of intent that adults spend decades learning to suppress. "Okay," he said. "But don't run." She didn't run. She walked very quickly, which was technically different. He followed her through the crowd with the ease of a man who'd spent years moving through rooms where no one expected him. People parted without noticing they'd parted. Conversations continued around him. He passed 3 executives in tailored suits, a woman in a gold dress laughing too loud at something, a cluster of assistants near the bar comparing notes in whispers. None of them saw him. That was fine. He'd made his peace with it a long time ago. He saw the piano from across the room. It was in the corner near the east windows, a Steinway grand with a cover of dark cloth draped over the keys, clearly not played. One of those things that expensive lobbies acquire the way they acquire sculptures, for the impression of culture rather than the practice of it. He looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked away. Ray had found the chocolate-covered strawberries and was reaching for one at the edge of the platter, stretching onto her toes, completely focused, unaware of the wet patch of floor near the base of the table. He was already moving when she slipped. Not fast enough. Her knee hit the marble with a sharp crack that cut through the ambient noise of the party. Small sound. Big impact. Her face went from concentration to shock to pain in about half a second, and then her bottom lip was trembling and Caleb was on one knee beside her, his handkerchief out, his voice low and steady. "Hey, look at me, I've got you, a scrape." Small bleed through her tights, nothing serious. But she was 8 and it was Christmas Eve, and the floor was cold and her knee was stinging. She held it together better than he expected. That was Claire in her, that particular brand of quiet toughness. Take the hit, don't fall apart. He was pressing the handkerchief gently to her knee when the voice arrived. "Can you not control your child?" The man was maybe 42. Navy suit, perfectly pressed. Chestnut hair arranged in the way hair only looks when someone has spent real money on it. His face was handsome in a constructed way, not quite alive. He was looking at Ray's knee, at the small smear of blood on the marble, at Caleb's faded work shirt, and he was annoyed. Genuinely, unself-consciously annoyed, the way men are annoyed when something disrupts their evening that they consider beneath them. "This is a corporate event," the man said. "There's a staff entrance for a reason." Caleb stood slowly. He was taller than the man, broader, and he had learned, over years of situations exactly like this one, the precise amount of stillness that communicated everything without requiring a single word. "She slipped," Caleb said. "It was an accident. An accident that wouldn't have happened if you knew your place." Ray was looking up at the man with wide eyes, processing the particular childhood confusion that arrives when an adult is cruel for no reason she can understand. Caleb opened his mouth, and someone else spoke first. The voice came from the mezzanine level, quiet. But it carried the way voices carry when the person using them has never once needed to raise them to be heard. "Apologize to him." Caleb looked up. She was coming down the stairs with the kind of deliberate calm that takes years to develop. Not slow. Not hurried, certain. Each step placed like she had already decided exactly where this was going, and was simply completing the motion. Norah Whitfield, he knew her from the lobby directory photograph. 36 years old, CEO of Whitfield Capital since she was 29. The kind of woman that business publications described as formidable and meant it as both a compliment and a warning. She was wearing a dark red dress, her hair was down, and her eyes, when they landed on the man in the navy suit, were the temperature of a window pane in January. "Garrett," she said. The man straightened. "Victoria, he started Norah," she said, and she didn't explain the correction or wait for him to absorb it. "Apologize to my employee." Garrett's jaw tightened. His eyes moved around the room, cataloging the audience. The lobby had gone quiet in the way lobbies go quiet when something real is happening inside the performance of a party. People weren't looking directly, but everyone was listening. He produced a clipped sorry that landed on the floor between them and went nowhere near either Caleb or Ray. Norah turned to Caleb then, and something moved across her face that he hadn't expected. Not the composed executive expression. Something briefer and unguarded. She looked at the way he was holding Ray, his hand curved around the back of the girl's head, and he saw recognition flicker there. Not recognition of him. He was sure of that. She didn't know who he was. Something else. Something that looked like she was seeing a shape she already knew from a different context. "Take care of your daughter," she said. "The first aid kit is on the 5th floor. Executive lounge. Take the private elevator." She gestured toward the brass doors behind the reception desk. "Take your time." He nodded. His throat did the thing it sometimes did when a small kindness arrived unexpectedly, tightening against something he didn't want to name. "Thank you," he said. She had already turned back to Garrett. The 5th floor was quiet and carpeted and smelled like coffee and leather. Beth Arden, one of Norah's assistants, met them at the elevator without being asked. She had the first aid kit and a small plate of Christmas cookies and the manner of someone who had been briefed that a child was coming and had prepared accordingly. Ray accepted the cookies with grave dignity. Caleb cleaned and bandaged the knee carefully. Ray sitting on a leather chair and eating a sugar cookie shaped like a reindeer while he worked. She asked him 3 questions about why blood was red. He answered all 3 without looking up. When they were done, she hopped down and said she felt better, and could they go back to the party now? He said yes. He didn't say what he was thinking, which was that he wanted to take her home. That the lobby felt heavier than usual tonight, like the air was holding something it hadn't been holding before. He said yes. They went back downstairs. The lobby was louder when they returned. Someone had lifted the cover off the Steinway. A man from accounting, visibly having a better time than his skill warranted, was playing something that vaguely resembled a Christmas carol if you were generous and slightly deaf. A small crowd had gathered. People were laughing, requesting songs. Ray stopped walking. She looked at the piano. Then she looked at her father, Daddy. Her voice had the pitch she used when she'd already decided the answer was yes and was going through the formality of asking, "Please play something, just one song, so I can remember tonight." Caleb looked at the piano. He hadn't played in front of people in years. Not since before Claire. Not since the accident, really. Not properly. Not the way he used to play, when it felt like the music was arriving from somewhere below conscious thought. His right hand had healed, most mostly. The surgeons had done what they could, which was more than they'd promised and less than what had existed before. He could play. He had never entirely stopped. He played at the community center on Wednesday mornings when the room was empty and the light came in sideways through the high windows. But not in front of people, because in front of people it became proof of what he'd lost, of the distance between what he had been and what he was now. Ray was looking at him, 8 years old, blue dress with small buttons, knee freshly bandaged, eyes full of that impossible trust that children deposit in their parents like money in a bank, expecting it to be there when they need it. He sat down at the piano. The accountant stepped aside with a good-natured bow. The small crowd shifted, curious, a little skeptical. This was the maintenance guy. They all knew who he was, not by name. By category, Caleb didn't look at any of them. He placed his hands on the keys. His right hand trembled slightly, the way it always did. The residual effect of the nerve damage. A small, constant reminder. The scars ran across his palm and up toward his wrist, the healed webwork of tissue from a night 12 years ago that had rerouted everything. He breathed once, then he began to play. It started so softly that some people near the back kept talking for a few seconds before they stopped. Before something in the sound reached them and made continuing to talk feel like an intrusion, the melody was not a Christmas carol. Not anything recognizable, not in any published collection, not on any platform, not in any archive. It existed in one place only, in Caleb Hart's hands and in his memory, and for the past 18 years in exactly one other person's memory. He played it the way he always played it when he was alone, not as a performance, as a reckoning. Each note placed with the precision that comes not from showing off, but from needing to get it exactly right. The way you need to get certain things exactly right, because they matter too much to approximate, the melody rose. It swelled into something that had no business existing in a corporate lobby on Christmas Eve. Something that belonged in a dark room with rain on the windows, or on a dock at the end of summer, or in the particular silence that follows a loss, so total you don't have a name for it yet. Ray stood beside the piano with her hands clasped. The crowd went completely still, and on the mezzanine above, Norah Whitfield stopped moving. She had been heading back up, done with Garrett's excuses and the party noise and the quarterly notes Beth had forwarded to her phone. Her foot landed on the third step and stopped. The music reached her like something physical, not sound exactly, more like a hand laid flat against her sternum. She knew this melody. The thought arrived not as a realization but as a shock, because this was not possible. This melody was not something anyone should know. It had never been recorded. Never transcribed in any form that survived. It had lived for 18 years in exactly one place. In her, Owen Carver had played it for her on the last night of summer music camp. She was 18. He was 18. It was late August, and the stars over the lake were so stentorious they looked accidental. He'd set up a portable keyboard on the dock and played this piece, this melody that wound and rose and paused in precisely the places this stranger was pausing now. And he'd called it Harbor Light and said it was everything he felt but couldn't say out loud. 3 days later, she drove home. 6 weeks after that, 2 police officers stood on her parents' porch with their hats in their hands. Owen had died on a Tuesday evening on a rain-slicked highway 2 counties over. He was 19. His roommate said later he'd been talking all week about calling her. Harbor Light had died with him, or she had believed that for 18 years. Her hand gripped the railing. She wasn't breathing correctly. Below her, the music was still moving, still doing the thing it did in the fourth measure, that slight hesitation before the melody resolved, that specific pause that Owen had described as the moment when you want to say something and realize words won't be enough. Norah came down the stairs. Her feet made the decision before she did. She moved through the silent crowd to the edge of the piano. The man was playing with his eyes closed. His face held no performance, no awareness of the crowd at all. He was somewhere else entirely, settled into the music the way people settle into something they've lived with for a long time. He played the last note, let it fade completely, opened his eyes, and found her standing 3 feet away. Where did you learn that? She hadn't meant it to come out quite like that. Without the professional distance she normally kept between herself and whatever moved inside her. But there it was. He stood from the bench. Slowly, his eyes met hers, and something in his expression moved in a way she couldn't read. It wasn't surprise. That was the thing. It should have been surprise. It looked like something else. Like a man who has been waiting for a door to open and isn't entirely sure he wants to walk through it. Just an old melody, he said. Something I picked up years ago. Don't the word came out harder than she intended. That song was written for me. Her voice had dropped. The people nearest them were trying not to visibly listen and failing. By someone who died 18 years ago. No one else knew it. No one could have known it. She stepped closer. Who are you? A small hand appeared at the man's side. His daughter tugging gently at his sleeve. Her eyes were heavy. She'd had a long evening. The man looked at the girl, then back at Norah. Something closed in his expression. Not rudeness, more like a decision. I think it's time to get her home, he said. It was not an answer. Norah stood at the piano and watched them go. His hand wrapped around the girl's small shoulders. The easy weight of trust between them, the melody continued inside her skull long after the lobby noise had swallowed everything else. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark of her apartment on the 32nd floor and ran the melody through her head on a loop, checking every note against what she remembered. It matched. Every measure. She thought about Owen, which she had not allowed herself to do seriously in a long time. Owen with his terrible handwriting and his habit of laughing at his own jokes before he finished telling them. Owen who played piano like he was having an argument with it and usually winning. Owen who had sat beside her on a dock at the end of summer and played her a song and called it Harbor Light. Who was this man? She was in her office at 6:45 the next morning. She pulled Caleb's employment file before the building fully woke. It was thin, almost deliberately so. Maintenance technician hired 3 years ago. Previous employment at a warehouse, a grocery store, a building services company across town. Emergency contact, Rayhart 8, Dorset, no wife listed, no music listed, nothing that explained any of this. She called Tom Rafferty at 7. Tom was her head of security. Former police detective 15 years before a knee injury changed his plans. Quiet man. He had worked for her father before her and transferred his loyalty cleanly and without comment when she took over. I need you to check on an employee, she said. Caleb Hart, maintenance. The address on file. Tom called back 40 minutes later. She could hear something careful in his voice before he spoke. Boss, the apartment on Marsden Street. Landlord says Hart and his daughter moved out 3 days ago. Norah set down her coffee. 3 days ago, paid rent through the end of the month in cash, Tom continued. No forwarding address. Neighbor across the hall said they left early one morning with 2 suitcases. The girl was crying. Hart told her they were going on an adventure. Neighbor said he looked. Tom paused, like someone doing something they'd already decided on, not panicked. Prepared 3 days ago, before the party, before she had spoken to him. Before she had asked him a single question, he had moved his daughter out of their apartment and then come to the Christmas party and sat down at that piano and played that song and walked away. He had known what it would do to her. He had played it anyway. And then he had been ready to disappear. Why, she said it out loud to the empty office. Why would a man do that? She spent 4 days trying to find him. Tom ran the search with care. Credit activity, nothing that held. Phone pings, nothing traceable. The Marsden Street apartment, already cleared out. His direct deposit account opened at a small credit union with no digital trail that led anywhere useful. He had not disappeared on impulse. He had disappeared like a man who had thought it through. On the 5th day, Norah called a number she hadn't called in 17 years. Prof. Edmund Greer had been Owen Carver's mentor at the conservatory. He was in his early 60s now, still teaching, still writing occasional essays that appeared in music publications the right people read. He had spoken at Owen's funeral. He had been kind to her afterward, correctly and from a distance. She played him the video over the phone. One of her junior managers had filmed 30 seconds of Caleb playing at the party and posted it to the employee social channel before Norah's communications team removed it. Poor quality, tinny audio. But the melody came through clear. Greer listened. Then he was quiet for a long time. "That's remarkable," he said finally. "Is it Harbor Light?" she said. Owen's piece. Greer made a sound she couldn't categorize. "Norah," he said, "I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago. I didn't because I thought it would complicate your grief. I thought I was protecting you. I believe now I was protecting myself." She sat very still. "Owen didn't finish that piece," Greer said. The room seemed to tilt. "He wrote the opening," Greer continued. 8 bars. Maybe 10. But he was stuck. Couldn't find where to take it. 2 weeks of trying and scrapping versions. I watched him struggle with it. Norah didn't speak. "There was another student at camp that summer," Greer said. "Quiet. Not part of Owen's circle. He came on a scholarship. His family had no money. He worked evenings during camp to cover his costs. Talented, genuinely talented, but the kind of student who doesn't push himself forward." He paused. Owen asked him for help. "The other student took those 8 bars and completed them, turned them into the piece you know. And then Owen died, and the song became part of his legacy, and I never corrected the record. Owen was my best student. Admitting he hadn't finished his masterwork felt like diminishing him. The other student had vanished. It seemed kinder to let the story stay simple." "Do you remember his name?" she said. Greer was quiet for a moment. "I don't," he said. "I taught hundreds of students over those years. He didn't fight for recognition. He gave the piece away and stepped back. I assumed he'd quit playing. People do." He paused again. "But Norah, the man in that video, I think it might be him," she said. "Yes," Greer said. "I think so too." She went back to her office and sat with that for a long time. The song she had built 18 years of private grief around. The last piece of Owen she'd kept like a specific inheritance. The melody she'd played in her head during board meetings and empty evenings. And the particular loneliness of a life that had everything except the thing that made the rest of it matter. Not entirely his. And the man who had actually written it had spent 3 years fixing ceiling tiles 40 feet above her head. She pulled his employee file again, stared at the sparse information, the warehouse job, the grocery store, 3 years of maintenance work, no history of music listed anywhere. Tom appeared in her doorway. "Still nothing on his whereabouts," he said. "Wherever he went, he planned it." She nodded. "He knew what that song would do to me, Tom," she said. "He moved his daughter out before the party. He was ready to run, and he still played it." Tom was quiet. Why would he do that? Tom thought about it the way he thought about things, carefully, without rushing to fill the silence. "Maybe he needed you to hear it," Tom said, even if he couldn't stay to explain. She looked at him. "Maybe he needed to know you'd heard it once," Tom said. Before he disappeared, she thought about that for a long time after Tom left. Below, the lobby filled with the ordinary traffic of a Thursday morning. People coming through the revolving doors, shaking December off their coats, heading for elevators. Normal. Functional. The building running exactly as it always ran. Somewhere in the maintenance logs there were 3 years of work orders in Caleb Harte's handwriting. Requests fulfilled. Problems solved. The building kept running and nobody asked who was doing it or what they had once been capable of. She looked out at the city. The question had changed shape on her. It wasn't why anymore. It was something quieter than that. Something that felt more like when. When would he come back? Because she was certain, with the particular certainty of someone who has been in enough negotiations to recognize when a thing isn't finished, that this wasn't finished. A man who plays that song in your lobby and then prepares to disappear is not a man who is done. He is a man who is deciding whether to be brave. She could wait. She had been waiting 18 years without knowing what she was waiting for. Outside, the first snow of December was beginning to fall. Light, preliminary. The kind of snow that is still making up its mind. She watched it for a moment, then she picked up her phone and went back to work. The snow had been falling for 3 days straight when he came back. Not dramatically. Not like the movies where a man returns with purpose and the music swells and everyone stops what they're doing to watch him arrive. He just appeared. Sitting at the Steinway in the empty lobby at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, the building down to its skeleton crew, the overhead lights dimmed to their overnight setting, his back to the elevator banks, his coat folded on the bench beside him, his hands resting on the keys but not pressing them yet. Like he was working up to something, Norah had been on the 14th floor reviewing the Riverside contracts when Beth's voice came through the intercom. Careful. The way Beth got careful when she thought information might land in a complicated way. Mustahart is in the lobby. Norah set down her pen. She didn't call the elevator. She took the stairs. 14 flights down in heels she should have taken off 3 hours ago. She didn't rush, but she didn't slow down either. And when she pushed through the stairwell door into the lobby, she stopped for just a moment, one hand still on the door, and looked at him. He hadn't started playing yet, he was just sitting there, shoulders carrying something that didn't show up on any chart or file. The kind of weight that accumulates slowly, over years, and becomes so familiar the man carrying it has stopped noticing how heavy it actually is. She crossed the lobby, her heels on marble, each step announcing itself in the quiet. He didn't turn around. But his back changed, the way a person's back changes when they know someone is approaching and are deciding how to receive them. Ray asked me why we left, he said. Not hello, not I'm sorry, just that. She kept walking until she was standing 6 feet behind him. She couldn't give her a good answer, he said. She liked it here. She liked Beth's cookies. She liked watching the building lights from across the street at night. She liked the CEO who let her use the fancy elevator. He paused, so we came back. He finally turned and she saw it. What the personnel file photograph hadn't shown, and what the Christmas party lighting had only half revealed. There were shadows under his eyes that spoke of bad sleep and long miles. He looked like a man who had driven somewhere, sat with a decision and driven back. I owe you the truth, he said, even if you don't like it. She pulled a chair from the nearby reception area, set it beside the piano bench and sat down, crossed her legs, folded her hands in her lap. Okay, she said, and waited. He told her about Owen first, not with drama, not with the careful calibration of someone managing how they're perceived, just the plain shape of what happened. The way you tell a story you've carried for 18 years and have finally run out of reasons to keep to yourself. The summer music camp. Owen Carver, who had been the kind of talent that rooms reorganized themselves around. Bright, magnetic. The student everyone expected to go somewhere real. And Caleb, who had arrived on a scholarship he'd applied for 4 times before it finally came through. Who had paid his way there by washing dishes at a diner 3 towns over, 52 hours a week, saving bus fare and nothing else. Who had played piano since he was 7 years old because his father taught him, and because it was the one place in his life where everything in his head went quiet. He had not been in Owen's circle. He had not been in anyone's circle. He described that summer the way people describe periods of their lives they've spent a long time examining. Not bitterness or longing, but with the clarity that comes from returning to something so many times you've finally stopped seeing only your own reflection in it. He'd noticed Norah from a distance. He said it plainly, without embarrassment, as a fact that had happened to him and that he'd made his peace with. You laughed a lot, he said. I remember thinking nobody laughs like that when they're performing happiness. That was the real thing. Norah looked at her hands. Owen came to him in the 3rd week of camp, sat beside him at lunch without preamble or ceremony, said he was stuck on something, a piece, opening 8 bars that felt right but led nowhere. He'd been trying to finish it for 2 weeks and every version he attempted felt wrong. He'd heard Caleb playing alone in the practice room late one evening, and he'd asked. He told me what the piece was for, Caleb said. Who it was for. He wasn't cruel about it. Owen wasn't a cruel person. He just said, this is for someone I can't find the right words for and I think you might understand what I mean. And you did, Norah said. Yeah, so you helped him, yeah. Just like that. Caleb looked at the keys. He offered to put my name on it, he said. Owen did. He wanted to. Said we'd both written it and both our names belonged on it. What did you say? I said no. Why? Because you didn't know I existed, Caleb said. And I said it would be strange. I said a lot of things that were all true and all covered for the thing that was actually true, which was that I wanted you to have something beautiful and I didn't need you to know it came from me. That was enough. More than enough. I was 20 years old and I'd never felt anything like that, and the only thing I could think to do with it was give it away and not ask for anything back. The lobby was quiet around them. Snow pressing softly against the tall windows. The city doing what cities do at midnight, continuing regardless. Then he died, she said. Then he died. He said it in the same rhythm she used. Same weight. Same resigned precision. And I let the song be his because it was already his in the ways that mattered to you. You'd heard it from him. The story you had was the one that held you. And I went home and tried to become someone who didn't still think about it every time he sat down at a piano. Norah looked up. Did it work? He looked back at her. No. She had seen Professor Greer 4 days before this. She told Caleb now. The phone call, the meeting, the 30 seconds of footage Greer had listened to twice without speaking. She told him what Greer said about Owen struggling with the piece, about the other student, about the long silence that followed. Caleb listened without interrupting. He wasn't angry. She'd half expected something. At Greer for the years of silence. At Owen for never correcting the record himself. Something. He just nodded once when she finished. He knew what he was doing, Caleb said. Greer. He was protecting a story that had already set into something solid. You can't pull one thread without unraveling the rest. You're not angry. He thought about it honestly. I was, he said, for a while, a long time ago. But you run out of energy for being angry at things that are finished, and that was finished. She looked at him steadily. Cleveland wasn't finished, she said. He went very still. She had found it 6 days ago. Not through Tom. Through the company's own archive. The Whitfield Productions subsidiary, dissolved and absorbed into the larger organization 8 years prior. Legal settlements from that period, names redacted in the public records. But she had lawyers. And lawyers had access to the unredacted files. Caleb Hart. Settlement agreement dated 12 years back, $75,000, full release of liability. The authorization 2 lines above the vice president's signature belonged to Walter Whitfield, her father. She didn't tell him how she'd found it. She just said, I know about Cleveland. He looked at her for a long moment, then he raised his right hand. She had noticed it before. The healed tissue running across his palm branching toward his wrist. She had thought about what left marks like that. Now she looked at it directly, the way you look at something when you're finally ready to understand what you're seeing. A stage rigging failure, he said. Opening night in Cleveland. The tour was with Whitfield Productions. I know 20-city regional concert series. He said it without bitterness but carefully. First contract I'd ever signed for real money. I was 26. I had a manager. My name on actual posters for the first time in my life. He turned his hand slowly. I got there early for rehearsal. Stage crew was still setting the rigging for the lights. I was walking past when I heard it. Metal fatigue. That sound a structure makes just before it decides it's done. There was a young woman under it, early 20s, Juilliard student, tuning her instrument with her back to the stage. She didn't hear anything coming. He set his hand back on his knee. I shoved her out of the way. And your hand got caught when the truss came down. He set it flat, factual. Like reciting something that happened to another person he knew well. 1/2 ton of equipment. 3 surgeries over 8 months. The 3rd surgeon was honest with me. He said I'd play again in some capacity. But not professionally. The nerve damage was too extensive. Too much scar tissue in the wrong places. Norah kept her eyes on his face. The contract was worth $300,000 for the full tour, he said. Plus recording options if the series went well. Your father's company settled me for $75,000. I signed because I needed the medical bills covered and I was 26 and I didn't know enough yet to push back harder. 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital, the contract was terminated. She made herself ask the question she already knew the answer to. How much were the medical bills? $68,000. So you walked away with $7,000. He looked at her. That's what I had. After 3 surgeries and 2 months inpatient and 6 months of physical therapy that partially worked, $7,000 and a right hand that would never do what it used to do. Norah did not look away. She wanted to. The professional instinct was strong. The trained reflex toward managing a moment rather than inhabiting it. She had spent 20 years developing that reflex. It had served her well and cost her things she was only now beginning to calculate. She didn't look away. You knew who I was, she said. When you applied here, you made the connection. At first I didn't, he said. Whitfield Productions was a subsidiary, different name on the paperwork, But when I got here and saw the lobby directory, Whitfield Capital, CEO Norah Whitfield, I did the math and you stayed. He was quite for a beat. I needed the job. Ray needed the health coverage. This was the best benefits package I'd found. I couldn't afford principals I couldn't pay for. He paused and, he said, and a longer pause. Seeing you from a distance was better than not seeing you at all. He said it without apology. The way a man says something he's decided to stop being ashamed of, Norah sat with that. The overnight lights made the lobby feel smaller than it did during business hours. More honest somehow. Less performance. I'm sorry, she said. The words felt small against the size of what he'd described, but they was true. What my father's company did to you, you didn't do it. I benefited from it. He met her eyes. So did a lot of people, he said. That's not the same thing as doing it. She shook her head. It's close enough that I'm not going to argue the distinction with you tonight. He almost smiled. Just at the corners. Just for a second. Fair, he said. After that it got easier. Not easy, easier. The way a room gets easier to be in once the thing that needed saying has finally been said and you can stop carrying it on top of everything else. They stayed in the lobby for 2 more hours. Talk the way people talk when they've shared the same building and the same world for years, without ever actually occupying the same space. Filling in outlines, letting the other person become a full thing instead of a category. He told her about Claire. He didn't start with the cancer. He started earlier. He started with meeting her at 31, 3 years after the accident, when he was doing plumbing work in the hospital where she worked as a nurse, and she'd asked him why he was always first to arrive and last to leave, and he'd said the overtime paid better, and she'd said that wasn't why. She saw through me from the first week, he said. It was annoying, honestly. I wasn't used to it. Norah smiled. She knew I'd been someone else before the accident, he said. I told her about the piano, about Cleveland. She didn't treat it like a tragedy, she treated it like a chapter. Said everyone had a before and after, and the interesting part was always what you built in between. He looked at the far windows. She was smarter than me. I always knew that. She made it easy instead of threatening, which is a skill a lot of people don't have. What happened? Breast cancer. Stage 3. Diagnosed when Ray was 4 years old. Norah went still. 3 years, he said. She fought hard for 3 years. Insurance covered most of it, but not everything. I worked whatever I could find. She kept working as long as she was able. She understood exactly what was happening to her body, which I think was its own kind of difficult. Knowing too much. Not being able to pretend. He looked at the piano keys. Toward the end, she reduced her pain medication, he said. She wanted to stay present. Wanted to read to Ray at night. Wanted to know what day it was and what Ray had done at school, and whether the noise in the hallway radiator had been fixed. Small things. She was very specific about the small things. His voice was steady. Not because he wasn't feeling it. Because he had lived with it long enough that he could carry it without dropping everything else at the same time. She died at home, he said. In our room. Ray had fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed. She wouldn't leave, and Claire had asked me not to make her. The last thing Claire said to me was, take care of our girl. Like I needed reminding. Like there was anything in the world I wouldn't do. He stopped. Norah didn't say, I'm sorry. It was too late for that. Too thin for what he'd described. She sounds like she was extraordinary, she said. He thought about it. She was ordinary, he said. She was the most ordinary, extraordinary person I've ever known. She got up every day and did the work, and loved the people around her and never made a performance of any of it. That's harder than it sounds. I know, Norah said. And she did. She knew it better than she'd admitted to anyone in a long time. She told him about her mother then, an aneurysm. She was 12. Her mother had been in the kitchen making coffee on a Saturday morning, and then she wasn't that fast. No warning, no final conversation. Just a Saturday morning that changed the shape of everything that came after it. Her father had transformed in the months that followed. She had watched it happen without being able to name it or stop it. Walter Whitfield, who had been stern but present before, became something else, more interior, harder in ways that didn't show on the surface. He had decided, she understood much later, that grief was weakness, that the solution to loss was to build things that couldn't be lost. Companies, structures, legacies in concrete and glass and wire transfer confirmations. He poured that decision into her, not with cruelty. She had spent years thinking about this. He was genuinely trying to prepare her for a world he believed had no interest in softness and no patience for people who weren't armored against it. He never hurt me directly, she said. Never needed to. He just had this way of looking at you when you'd disappointed him, like he was revising his estimate of your value downward. Quietly, permanently. Caleb nodded slowly. He was listening the way he listened. Not planning his response, just present. After Owen died, I threw myself into it, she said. Business school at 21. MBA at 23. I joined the company at 24. I thought if I worked hard enough and achieved enough, I'd eventually earn the warmth he kept behind a wall somewhere. Did you? She looked at the snow against the windows. I built a company worth $200 million, she said. He approved of the balance sheets. That was the warmth I got. Caleb said nothing. Let it sit without covering it. Sometimes the most painful thing isn't someone hurting you, she said. It's realizing they don't have what you need, and they never did, and you spent 20 years trying to extract it anyway. He understood that. She could see it in the way he received it, without pity, without rushing to make it smaller. Garrett, she said after a moment, he waited. My father chose him. Garrett Voss, private equity. The merger between our companies is worth $200 million and closes 6 weeks after the wedding. My father presented it to me as a sound business decision, and I agreed because I had no strong reason to disagree and didn't love anything enough to say yes to instead. Caleb was looking at her with the quality of attention that was different from most people's attention. Most people listened while also doing something else, monitoring the room, preparing their response. He just listened, completely. The way you listen when you've learned that missing something can cost you everything. That's a lonely way to live, he said. She didn't argue, because it had always been. She had just gotten very good at not noticing. The third week settled into a rhythm neither of them named, late evenings after the last regular staff had gone home. Sometimes the lobby, sometimes the small kitchens, the third floor, where someone had left a decent coffee maker and 2 mismatched mugs that both of them had started thinking of as theirs without saying so. Ray came twice that week. She had claimed a corner of Norah's office with the speed and confidence of someone who considered this a reasonable allocation of available space. She brought drawings. She asked questions without preamble or apology. She asked Norah how many shoes she owned and whether standing in the heeled ones hurt. Quite often, Norah said. She said it honestly because Ray had a way of making dishonesty feel unnecessary. Then why do you wear them? Because tall is useful in meetings. Ray considered this seriously. Daddy says the best tool is the one that does the job. She said yes. That's right. He says that about wrenches. She paused. I didn't know it was also about shoes. Norah made a sound that was definitely a laugh. She sat with Ray for 40 minutes that evening while Caleb finished a job on the 17th floor. They looked at Ray's drawings together, which were detailed and specific in the way children's drawings are when the child is paying close attention to things adults have stopped noticing. One drawing was of the lobby, the piano in the corner, a man at the bench, a woman at the top of a staircase with one hand on the railing. Norah looked at it for a long moment. That's you and Daddy, Ray said. From the Christmas party, I know. You looked like you'd seen a ghost. Norah considered that I had, she said. Sort of. Ray accepted this with the equanimity of a child who had learned that adults contained multitudes and it wasn't always worth pressing. Is the ghost gone now? She asked. I'm working on it, Norah said. Ray nodded, satisfied with that answer. That's what Daddy says about fixing things, she said. That some things you can't just fix once and be done. You have to work on them, every day. Even when you think you're finished, you probably aren't. She said it without weight, as information. The way you relay something you've heard enough times, it's become furniture. Your father is very wise. He's also funny sometimes. He doesn't show that part to people he doesn't know yet. Norah looked at her. Is he funny with you? Ray grinned, showing the gap where she'd lost a tooth the week before. Oh yeah, she said. He does this really bad British accent when he makes oatmeal in the morning. Like, genuinely terrible. But I laugh every time and I think that's the whole point. Norah looked out at the city lights below. Yeah, she said quietly. I think that's exactly the point. Caleb arrived 20 minutes later. He stood in the doorway, assessed the scene, and looked at his daughter with the expression of a man who suspects something has been revealed in his absence. What did you two talk about? He said. Shows, Ray said, and ghosts, and oatmeal. He looked at Norah. She kept her face perfectly neutral. Productive evening, she said. He sat down in the chair across from her desk and Ray immediately climbed into his lap, with the territorial ease of someone who had never once questioned her right to that space. He folded his arms around her automatically, without thinking. The way breathing is without thinking. Norah watched that and felt something move through her that she didn't immediately have a name for. Something old and quiet and long deferred. Then Garrett came. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon without warning, which was how he communicated that he considered himself exempt from the protocols governing other people's access to her time. He was in the charcoal suit, the one he wore when he wanted to perform authority rather than simply have it. "We need to talk about the wedding timeline," he said. She kept her eyes on her screen. "I'm in the middle of the Riverside contracts. You've been avoiding my planning emails for 3 weeks. I've been working." He moved to the window. The move people make when they want to be framed against something impressive. "The caterer needs final numbers," he said. "My mother has called Beth 4 times. I need to know you're still committed to this." She stopped typing. "Do you love me?" she said. He turned. "What kind of question is that?" "A straightforward one. Do you love me? Not the merger. Not the combined entity. Me." His jaw worked. "I care about you," he said. "I respect you. I think we make an exceptional partnership." "That's not what I asked. Love is a word people use when they lack more precise vocabulary," Garrett said. "What we have is more durable than that. Strategic. Mutually beneficial. Built to last." She thought about Caleb in the lobby at midnight saying that's a lonely way to live. She looked at Garrett. "You're right," she said. Very practical. Something shifted behind his eyes. The smooth surface recalibrated. "This is about him," he said. "The maintenance worker who played piano at the Christmas party. I've seen you talking to him in the evenings." Beth mentioned it. "His name is Caleb Hart. I don't care what his name is." She noticed the folder then. Manila. Thick. He'd carried it in under his arm and now sat it on her desk with a deliberateness that announced itself. "What is that?" "Insurance," he said. "In case you get any ideas about calling things off." He opened it. Financial documents. Her company's documents, wire transfers, dates, account numbers. Technically accurate, all of it. Framed in a way that, stripped of context, suggested something it wasn't. These could look like irregularities, he said, if someone wanted to present them that way. Questions about leadership judgment, financial impropriety. The kind of story that writes itself once it starts. She looked at him. "You're serious?" "The wedding happens," he said. "The merger closes. Everyone gets what they came for." She said nothing. "Or things get complicated," he said. "Messes are expensive. And people start asking why a CEO made a series of unusual decisions right around the time she began spending evenings alone with a member of her maintenance staff." He picked up the folder. "You're smart," he said. "You'll make the right call." He walked out. She sat very still for a full minute after the door closed. Then she picked up her phone. "Beth," she said, "I need you to pull every financial document connected to the Voss Capital merger. Every wire transfer, every approval. Every email thread from the past 18 months. Beth's voice was careful. "Anything specific I'm looking for?" "Anything that doesn't match," Norah said. "Anything at all." Beth left without further questions. Norah stood at the window. Outside, the city was doing its afternoon thing. Taxis and foot traffic and the ordinary motion of a Tuesday in December. All of it completely unaware that something in this office had just changed direction. She thought about Caleb's voice on the phone from 2 nights ago. She'd called him late, after a board call had run long and left her tired in a way that wasn't about the hours. He'd picked up on the second ring and talked to her for 40 minutes about nothing in particular. The kind of conversation that doesn't solve anything and somehow fixes everything. And when she'd finally said goodnight, he'd said sleep well in a tone that sounded like he meant it specifically, not generally, not as a formality. She thought about that now. She thought about the folder Garrett had left on her desk. She thought about Caleb's right hand on the piano keys, the healed tissue, the 3 surgeries, the $7,000 that remained after a career was erased and the bills were paid. She thought about the word insurance coming out of Garrett Voss's mouth, with a smile that didn't go anywhere near his eyes. Beth returned 3 hours later with a flash drive and an expression that said she'd been hoping not to find what she'd found. "Boss," she said, "you need to see this." They spread it across the conference table. The 2 of them, standing on opposite sides of something that had been hidden inside legitimate-looking numbers for a year and a half. Garrett Voss had been taking money from his own firm, not carelessly, methodically, through a network of domestic shell companies that had addresses and officers and proper filings, but no employees, no operations, and no reason to exist except as conduits. $42 million. Over 18 months, his firm's actual asset values had been falsified in reports sent to investors who had no reason to question the man their money was with. Voss Capital was not struggling. It was structurally hollowed out. A building with a beautiful facade and nothing load-bearing left inside. The merger was not an opportunity. It was a life raft. He needed access to Whitfield Capital's accounts before his own investors started looking too carefully at the numbers. The combined entity would absorb the deficit. The wedding was the mechanism, not a partnership, an escape route. Beth pointed to a cluster of internal emails. He'd been planning this for at least 2 years, she said. He researched companies with strong balance sheets and single female leadership before approaching your father. She paused. There's evidence this isn't the first time. Different city, different firm. Settled quietly before it reached prosecution. Norah looked at the emails. He chose me, she said. Because my father would push for the deal. Because I'd be focused on terms and not looking at his underlying books. Yes, Beth said. Norah looked at the table covered in documents. How much of this is independently verifiable? All of it, Beth said. Given what's here, Norah was quiet for a moment. She thought about her father in Palm Springs signing a settlement authorization for $75,000. She thought about the phrase acceptable risk, delivered without hesitation, and the absolute calm of a man who had never once lost sleep over what that phrase covered. She gathered the documents into a careful stack. Get me the corporate attorneys, she said. Tonight if they're available. And I need Tom. Beth moved. One more thing, Norah said. Beth stopped at the door. Don't tell anyone what we're looking at. Not yet. Understood. Beth left. The door clicked shut. Norah stood alone in the conference room. $42 million. 18 months of careful theft. A merger as cover. A wedding as a legal mechanism. And somewhere beneath all of it, the faint echo of a pattern she now recognized. A habit of using people as instruments and calling it business and moving on without looking back. Her father had taught her that pattern by example. She had spent 20 years trying to believe she'd learned something different. She called Caleb from the window. He picked up on the second ring. Don't come to the building tonight, she said. Keep Ray close. His voice shifted immediately. What's wrong? Everything is about to get complicated, she said. I need you both somewhere safe until it's over. Norah, yeah. What are you doing? She looked out at the city. The lights coming on across the skyline as the afternoon went grey. Something that might cost me everything I've built, she said. A pause, not hesitation. The pause of a man choosing his words carefully because they matter. Then his voice, steady and low and certain. Whatever happens in that building, he said. You're not alone on the other side of it. She closed her eyes 1 second. 2. I know, she said. She hung up before she said anything else. Because some things needed to be felt in the dark before they could be spoken in the light. She turned back to the conference table, picked up her pen, and began. She dressed carefully that morning, not for anyone else, for herself, the way you check your gear before something real, not superstition, preparation. The physical act of getting ready, standing in for the emotional kind, when the emotional kind isn't something you can fully complete in advance. Dark suit, the charcoal one she wore when she needed to feel like Ein was made of something structural. Low heels because she'd be standing for a long time and needed her feet under her. No jewelry except the small watch her mother had left behind. The one that still kept perfect time after 24 years. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. You are going to lose something today, she told the woman looking back. Maybe a lot of things, the question is what you keep. She picked up her bag and walked out. Walter was already there when she arrived. 45th floor, his old office. The one he'd refused to fully vacate when he retired to Palm Springs 4 years ago, keeping it as a satellite, as a symbolic claim on territory he'd built with his own hands and wasn't ready to surrender even from a distance. He was standing at the window with his coffee, silver-haired, impeccably dressed at 7 in the morning, which had always been his way of signaling that preparation was a form of dominance. He looked older than she remembered from Thanksgiving, the lines around his mouth deeper, the set of his shoulders slightly more deliberate. He turned when she came in. This better be substantial, he said. I flew in last night. She set her bag on the table. It is. She laid the documents out, methodically. The way she'd rehearsed sitting on her conference room floor at 2 in the morning with Beth's flash drive and cold coffee. Each page placed with precision. Each column of numbers positioned so the pattern built itself in front of him. Garrett Voss has been embezzling from his own firm, she said. 18 months. $42 million routed through shell companies with no real operations. The merger isn't a partnership. It's a mechanism for him to absorb the deficit into our accounts before his investors discover what's missing. She watched her father's face. He read the first 3 pages, then the next 2. His expression didn't change. That had always been his skill, the face that gave nothing away. She had spent 20 years trying to replicate it, and had only partly succeeded because somewhere in her there was still enough of her mother that the complete performance remained out of reach. He set the papers down. "These can be resolved," he said. She looked at him. "Quickly," he said. "Between the parties. A restructured agreement, additional protective clauses. We don't need regulators involved." She waited. She had expected this. Had lain awake knowing it was coming and preparing for it anyway. "He's a criminal," she said. "He made poor decisions under pressure. He tried to blackmail me," she said. "Yesterday in my office. He threatened to fabricate evidence against me if I moved to end the engagement." Walter's expression shifted. Just slightly, the recalculation of someone absorbing new information and deciding what to do with it. Then he said, "That's manageable." Norah went still. Manageable, with the right legal structure. She felt something move through her, not anger. Colder than anger. More clarifying, she said, "I want to talk about Whitfield Productions." The shift in his face was different this time. More careful. Ancient history. Caleb Hart. She said, 26 years old, signed with Whitfield Productions 12 years ago. Stage rigging failure on opening night in Cleveland. He saved a performer's life and lost the full use of his right hand in the process. 3 surgeries, settled for $75,000. "You signed the authorization." Walter set his coffee down. "These things happen in live production," he said. "The equipment was within approved parameters at the time. It wasn't." She laid the inspection reports on top of the financial documents. "The equipment failed a safety check 6 weeks before that tour opened. Someone approved proceeding anyway. The cost of replacement parts was $11,000. The settlement paid out was $75,000, against a $300,000 contract that was cancelled 2 weeks after he left the hospital." Walter looked at the inspection report. He was adequately compensated, $75,000 for the end of his career, for an injury sustained in a professional environment with inherent risk. Walter's voice moved into the register she recognized from childhood, the one that closed discussion, the one that announced the decision had been made and arguing about it was simply noise. He received compensation. He signed a release. The matter was settled. He was 26, she said. He didn't know enough yet to push back harder. He should have found better counsel. She looked at her father, really looked at him. This was the thing about clarity she was learning. It didn't arrive with noise or ceremony. It arrived quietly, after years of hoping you were wrong, after years of finding context and explanation and reasons to believe the man in front of you was more than what he sometimes appeared to be. Clarity just arrived. And once it did, you couldn't explain it away anymore. "I spent 20 years, she said, trying to prove to you that I was worth your approval, Norah. I'm not finished." Her voice was even. She hadn't entirely expected that. Somewhere between the elevator and this room she had found something that felt like bedrock. "I ran this company," she said. "Doubled revenue in 7 years. Built a reputation this industry respects. And I did all of it hoping that one day you'd look at me the way you looked at the balance sheets. Like I was enough, like I'd finally done enough." Walter's jaw tightened. "I have always been proud of what you've built." "No," she said. "You've been satisfied with my performance. Those are different things and you know it." He moved to speak. She raised one hand, not aggressively, just stopping him, claiming the floor for another moment. "I'm calling off the engagement," she said. "I'm turning Garrett's records over to federal investigators. I'm cooperating fully with whatever follows. And I'm initiating a complete review of Whitfield Productions' historical settlements. Anyone who was inadequately compensated gets a second look with current counsel." Walter stared at her. "You'll destroy everything I built. I'll rebuild it on ground that doesn't shift," she said. "Or it wasn't worth keeping. You are doing this," he said. His voice had gone quiet, the quiet that preceded storms when she was a child. For that man, the maintenance worker. You are throwing away a $200 million deal because you developed feelings for someone you employ. His name is Caleb Hart, she said. And no, I'm not doing this for him. She picked up her bag. I'm doing it because I'm done building on a foundation made of people we crushed and called it acceptable risk. She met his eyes for one steady moment. You taught me that power meant never apologizing, never showing weakness, never letting anything cost you enough to matter. You were wrong. Real power is choosing the truth even when it's expensive. She moved toward the door, Walter's voice behind her, final and flat. If you do this, you will not be my daughter. She stopped, one breath. I've been preparing for that possibility for a long time, she said, and she walked out. She didn't look back. She had stopped looking back for things that weren't going to follow. The board meeting was called for 2 o'clock, 12 members, full attendance required. Beth had sent the notice at midnight with a subject line that left no room for interpretation. 7 men, 5 women, ages ranging from 51 to 74, old real estate money and newer investment capital, and 2 members who had joined 3 years ago and brought with them a slightly different calculus about institutional risk. They all came. Nobody asked questions beforehand. That was its own kind of answer. Garrett was not there. Tom Rafferty had coordinated with federal investigators at 6 that morning. The documentation Norah had submitted the previous night, along with supplementary records her attorneys had compiled through the small hours, was sufficient for an immediate warrant. Garrett Voss had been met in the parking structure at 7:43 by 2 agents and his attorney on the phone. He was not having a good morning. Norah stood at the head of the conference table. She had spent her entire professional life in rooms like this one, learning how they worked, learning to read the particular air of a boardroom before a consequential decision. The way silence organized itself differently depending on whether the power in the room was settled or contested. This room was contested. She could feel it before anyone spoke. Thank you for coming on short notice, she said. I'll be direct. She presented the Garrett Voss evidence without editorial. Each document, each wire transfer, each shell company filing. The pattern assembled itself in front of them the way patterns do when the data is clean and the presentation is honest. No drama, no appeal to emotion, just the shape of what had happened, laid out so that any reasonable person looking at it would reach the same conclusion. When she finished, she said, I'm terminating the engagement and the merger. I've filed the relevant documentation with federal investigators. I'm prepared for the short-term consequences to our stock price and our investor relationships. I believe protecting the integrity of this company is worth that cost. Margaret Holt spoke first. Margaret was 71, had been on the board since Walter ran the company. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a voice that carried authority without effort. These are serious allegations, she said, independently verified. Our forensic accountant spent 36 hours confirming every transaction, Norah said. His own firm's internal communications corroborate it. We have his direct emails to the shell company operators. James Whitfield, the hedge fund manager, leaned forward. This creates instability, he said. We've communicated merger benefits to our investors. Pulling back raises questions about our due diligence process. Our due diligence was thorough, Norah said. His was deceptive. Those are not equivalent failures. The optics remain difficult. The optics of proceeding are considerably worse. Then the other argument arrived, not from Walter. He wasn't there. But Douglas Crane, the oldest board member, Walter's contemporary and long-standing proxy in rooms. Walter wasn't physically occupying, cleared his throat. There's a secondary matter, Douglas said. That's been brought to the board's attention prior to this meeting. He opened his folder. Photographs, security footage, stills, Norah and Caleb in the lobby, the piano, late evenings. 2 people in conversation in an empty building. Nothing inappropriate by any reasonable standard. But framed in still images stripped of context, they suggested what someone with bad intentions would want them to suggest. Garrett's work, obviously, sent before the arrest. One final move. Margaret looked at the photographs and then at Norah with an expression that was asking a question without quite asking it. Norah met her eyes. Yes, she said. I care about him. That's accurate. The room shifted. And I want to be precise about what that does and doesn't have to do with this decision. She addressed the full table. If I were protecting a personal interest, she said, I would have buried Garrett's records. I would have married him in 6 weeks and absorbed the merger, and protected the short-term numbers, and no one in this room would have known until the SEC found it themselves. At which point, we would have been complicit in the concealment and facing consequences an order of magnitude worse than what we're facing now. Instead, I spent 36 hours confirming evidence and walked into this room with it. That is not compromised judgment. That is the opposite of compromised judgment, silence. She let it hold. There is also the matter of Whitfield Productions, she said. Douglas Crane went carefully still. 12 years ago, a performer was injured at one of our subsidiaries' events, she said. The equipment had failed a safety inspection 6 weeks prior and was approved for continued use. The performer saved a colleague's life and lost the full use of his dominant hand in the process. He was settled for $75,000 against a $300,000 contract and a professional career that never recovered. I'm initiating a full review of that settlement and the broader history of similar cases under the subsidiary. Anyone inadequately compensated will be reviewed and addressed. Margaret Holt was looking at her now with something that lived in the territory between respect and recognition. The deliberations took 38 minutes. Norah waited in her office, stood at the window, watched the city, didn't check her phone, didn't rehearse anything. Just stood there and let the waiting be what it was. Some things you had to do alone all the way to the finish. The call came at 3:47, Margaret Holt's voice. 7-5, she said. In your favor. With conditions. Norah closed her eyes. 1 second, 2, what conditions? Independent Audit Committee, Margaret said. Quarterly external review for 18 months. Full documentation of your relationship with Mr. Hart filed with HR to establish no financial impropriety. And a formal communication to investors regarding the merger termination, drafted with legal within 48 hours. Done, Norah said. All of it. A pause. Then Margaret's voice shifted into something less formal. Something that reminded Norah that Margaret Holt had been a young woman once, navigating rooms where she was the only one who looked like her. For what it's worth, Margaret said. What you did today took a specific kind of courage, the kind that's rarer at this level than it should be. Norah didn't respond to that right away. She wasn't sure she was ready to receive it yet. Thank you, Margaret, she said, and walked back into the conference room to start the work. Walter did not return her calls, which was, she recognized after the third attempt, an answer, the most honest one he'd given her in years. She sat with that in her office at 7 that evening. The legal team still working through documents in the conference room. Beth moving between floors with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided this ship was not sinking on her watch. The city outside was going dark the way it did in December. Abruptly, without ceremony. 1 hour there was pale grey light on the glass towers, and then there wasn't. Then Tom appeared in her doorway. Someone here to see you. Caleb was standing behind him. Ray asleep against his shoulder, completely boneless the way sleeping children are. Her dark curls falling across his arm, his hand curved around her back automatically, the way breathing is automatic. He'd brought her past her bedtime. She hadn't objected, which meant she'd chosen it. Tom stepped aside. Caleb came in. He looked at Norah the way he'd looked at her in the lobby the first night he came back, reading, taking inventory of what the day had cost and where she still was. You're still standing, he said, barely. That counts. She looked at the sleeping child. How long has she been out? Since the car, he said. She lasted exactly 4 blocks after I told her we were coming here and then went completely offline. Norah smiled. First real one all day. She got up and moved the stack of files off the long sofa against the wall and set a folded coat down as a pillow. Caleb settled Ray onto it with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times and had the choreography in his body. He straightened, looked at Norah. 7-5, he said. Beth texted me. I told her not to. She disagreed. He moved to stand beside her at the window, not too close, just present, the city below doing its evening thing. Lights in the glass towers coming on one by one. Traffic patient in the way traffic gets patient when it's given up fighting itself. I lost my father today, she said. Maybe permanently. He was quiet. He was still for a moment. I know something about losing a parent before they're actually gone, he said. My father died when I was 15. He was a mechanic. But I'd been losing him incrementally for years before that. To a job that used him up and paid him less than he was worth and sent him home with nothing left. He looked at the city. The grief isn't different just because the person is still walking around, he said. You still mourn the version of them you needed, the version they couldn't give you. Whether they're gone or just unavailable, the absence is the same shape. She turned to look at him. He was looking at his right hand, turning it slightly. The habit of someone who had spent 12 years checking whether the function was still there. Caleb, she said. He looked up. She went to her desk, opened the bottom drawer, took out an envelope. Old paper gone soft at the folds. Her name written on the front in handwriting she had spent 3 weeks trying to identify before she understood whose it was. It had arrived in the interoffice mail 10 days ago. No sender name. Beth had flagged it as personal correspondence and left it on Norah's desk without opening it. Norah had opened it, and then she had read it 3 times standing in the middle of her office, and then she had sat down on the floor and stayed there for a while. She held it out to him now. He looked at it. He knew what it was before he took it. She could see that. The recognition moved across his face slowly. The way recognition moves when you see something you'd stopped expecting to see. Claire, he said. She wrote it before she died, Norah said. I don't know how it got to me. I think maybe you sent it without telling yourself you were sending it. I think maybe you meant for me to find it before you found the courage to say what it says yourself. He held the envelope, then he opened it. He read it standing at the window. She didn't watch his face. She looked at the city instead and gave him whatever the reading required. Some things deserve privacy even in company. When he finished, he held the pages for a long moment, then he folded them carefully, put them back in the envelope, and held it out to her. She took it. She looked down at it in her hands. Claire had not written about love in the romantic sense. She had written about Caleb the way someone writes when they have known a person completely, from the inside, without revision. She wrote, "He has been giving things away since he was 20 years old without asking for anything back. If you are reading this, it means he finally found someone he thought was worth the risk of being known. Don't make him regret the courage it took to let you see him. Not because he needs protecting, but because he has spent long enough being overlooked by a world that didn't know what it was looking at." Norah looked up. He was already looking at her. She didn't say anything. Neither did he, which was fine. Which was more than fine, because some things don't need to be said. They just need to be known by both people at the same time, in the same room, without anything between them. Across the room, Ray stirred slightly on the sofa. Resettled. Was still again. Norah walked to the window. Stood beside him, not too close, just present. Outside the city held its breath for one moment, and then kept going the way cities always do, and the lights across the skyline came on one by one like something slowly waking up. The surgery was scheduled for the 2nd week of February. Caleb had said no 3 times before he said yes. The first time, "I've made my peace with it. I play well enough. I teach. I don't need more than enough." The second time, "The failure rate is real. If it makes things worse, I can't teach properly. I won't risk Ray's stability for an experimental procedure." The third time, he didn't say anything for a long while. Just sat in Norah's office looking at the research papers Professor Greer had brought and not reading them, looking at the cover page, the hospital name, the surgeon's credentials, the list of prior patients and outcomes presented in careful statistical language that was trying very hard not to promise anything. Ray was sitting cross-legged on the floor drawing in her sketchbook. Without looking up, she said, "Daddy, I want to hear you play the way Grandma's videos show." Claire had kept recordings on a hard drive. A younger Caleb at a Steinway in a recital hall, 23 years old, both hands moving the way his body had been built to move before one night changed the geometry of everything. Ray had found the drive the previous spring, had watched the recordings 17 times, had said nothing about them until now. Caleb looked at his daughter, then he looked at Norah, then he looked back at the research papers. "Okay," he said. "Schedule it." The procedure was 8 hours at a hospital 2 hours north. A specialist who had spent a decade developing microsurgical techniques for nerve reconstruction in old crush injuries. 68% success rate for meaningful functional improvement. Not a guarantee, not even a strong probability. The best available option by a significant margin. Norah waited in the family lounge on the 2nd floor. She had brought files. She looked at them for approximately 15 minutes and then put them away and sat there doing the things she was not good at, which was waiting without managing. Ray sat beside her with her sketchbook. She drew an octopus, a horse, a highly detailed map of the hospital's second floor with a note indicating that the vending machine near the east elevator was superior to the one near the stairs. "How do you know that?" Norah asked. "I investigated," Ray said. "When?" "While you were on the phone." Norah looked at her. "You were supposed to stay in this room." Ray considered this. "I came back," she said. "That's the important part." Norah looked at the ceiling. "You are so much like your father," she said. Ray grinned. "I know." The surgeon came out at 4:17 in the afternoon. "Cautiously optimistic," he said. "We rebuilt the neural connections where the scar tissue was restricting function. The initial response is good. Recovery will be significant. Daily physical therapy for a minimum of 4 months. Full outcome assessment at 6 months. But what we saw in there was better than projected." Ray grabbed Norah's hand, squeezed it hard. Norah squeezed back. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Recovery was hard. Caleb worked through 5 hours of physical therapy daily with the same quiet determination he brought to everything. And Norah, who came every evening after work, could see what it cost him in the set of his shoulders and the way he sometimes sat very still after the sessions with his hand in his lap and his eyes focused on nothing in particular. She didn't offer comfort. He didn't want comfort. He wanted company. So she brought company, files she'd have been reviewing alone in her office. Food from the diner 2 blocks from the hospital that made decent pie. Ray, who brought her sketchbook and had begun drawing portraits of the physical therapists with remarkable likeness and leaving them on the therapy room door as a kind of ongoing gallery. The lead therapist, a steady woman named Carol, who had seen every variety of patient frustration and impatience, told Norah privately that Ray was the best thing to happen to the recovery floor in her 12 years there. In the 3rd month, Caleb played a scale on the practice keyboard the therapist had given him. Major 8 notes up and back, his right hand slow. Several notes slightly imprecise, but present there, responding. He played it again and again. He didn't say anything, but Norah, watching from the doorway with her coat still on, saw something move across his face that she had seen once before. At the Christmas party, when he'd sat down at the Steinway and placed his hands on the keys and breathed once before beginning. Not relief. Deeper than relief. Recognition, a man finding something he'd left somewhere and stopped believing he would find again. By the 5th month he was playing intermediate pieces with only occasional cramping. The hand would never be what it was before Cleveland. The surgeons had been honest about that from the beginning, and he had accepted it with the pragmatism of someone who has already remade himself once and knows the territory. But it was functional, more than functional. Enough to teach properly. Enough to demonstrate. Enough to play Harbor Light from beginning to end without stopping. He did that for the first time alone in the hospital's small music room on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. And he didn't tell anyone he was going to do it, and he didn't tell anyone afterward what it had felt like. But that evening when Norah arrived, he looked different. "Lighter," she said. "You look lighter." He thought about it. "I think I put something down," he said. December came back around. Prof. Greer had been organizing the benefit concert since August. The kind of event that people in the music community put together when they want to do something real with the attention and resources available to them. Proceeds to a scholarship fund. The name on the fund, after a conversation Greer and Norah had on a Tuesday afternoon in October, was the Owen Carver and Caleb Hart Music Scholarship. 2 names, in the order they had arrived in the piece's history. Finally, the Sterling Tower Ballroom, 500 seats, everyone filled. The evening had drawn more attention than any of them anticipated. The story had moved through the music community and then outward the way true stories do when enough people know enough pieces of it. The pianist who had written a song and given it away at 20 and carried the weight of that quietly for 18 years. The CEO who had dismantled a fraudulent merger and taken on her own father's legacy and survived a 7-5 board vote and then come out the other side still standing. The concert that was, without anyone announcing it as such, about something larger than music, media present, a short list Norah had approved herself. Backstage, she found Caleb in the small room set aside for him. Dark suit that fit well, the first time she'd seen him in formal wear outside of her imagination. He was standing at the window looking out at the parking structure and the street beyond it with the expression of a man rehearsing something internal that had nothing to do with the music. She stood in the doorway. He didn't turn. 500 people, he said. I know. I haven't performed in front of an audience in 12 years as I know. My hand is going to cramp under pressure. It always does now. Then it'll cramp, she said. And you'll keep going. He turned. She looked at him. You wrote a song for someone you'd never spoken to, she said. You gave it away without asking for credit and walked home and told yourself that was enough. You showed up to a Christmas party after moving your daughter out of your apartment and played that song a lobby full of people who didn't know your name because something in you needed her to hear it one time. Even if you couldn't stay to explain. She moved into the room. You have been brave in circumstances that would have broken most people, she said. This is just a piano, and it has always been yours. He looked at her for a long moment, then he said, Okay, just that, okay. He walked out to the stage with Ray beside him, which had not been in any program, which was entirely his idea, and which had made Ray vibrate with contained excitement for approximately 45 seconds before she collected herself and walked beside him with the composure of someone taking a task seriously. He sat at the Steinway. She sat beside him on the small secondary bench they'd added. He placed his hands on the keys. The room went completely still. He began to play Harbor Light. All of it, the full piece. Owen's 8 bars folding into Caleb's continuation, the way 2 rivers fold into each other at a confluence. The join invisible from downstream once the waters have met. 18 years of that melody living only in memory and now here. Filling a room with both their names attached to it for the first time, Owen Carver. Who had started it with everything he felt for a girl he couldn't find the words for, and Caleb Hart. Who had finished it for the same reason, in the 4th row. Norah sat very still. She had heard this piece 100 times in her own head over 18 years. Had played it in the dark and the empty hours, and the particular loneliness of a life that had everything except the thing that made the rest of it matter. She had never heard it outside her own memory before. Not like this, not with both its names. She had told herself she was not going to cry in a room with 500 people and 3 journalists with cameras. She was already crying a little. She decided that was acceptable. In the 3rd movement, Caleb's right hand cramped. She saw it. The fraction of a second where the notes stuttered. The brief hesitation, the room probably didn't catch it. Ray did. She reached over and placed her small hand on her father's forearm. Barely any pressure, just contact, just presence, just I see you. Keep going, he kept going, slower in some passages, simpler where his right hand needed simplifying, letting the left carry more weight, adapting in real time to what the moment required rather than what the score demanded. And somehow it was better for it. Somehow the slight imperfection made it more honest, made it more like what it actually was, not a flawless performance of a finished piece. A man playing music that had cost him something. Music that had survived damage to arrive here. Music that was still going because the man playing it had decided to keep going. The last note the room exhaled. Then the applause started in the 2nd row and moved backward through the space in a wave, and by the time it reached the back wall people were on their feet, and it was not the polite measured kind. It was the other kind. The kind that follows something true. Ray stood beside him. He put his hand on her shoulder, she leaned into it. Father and daughter standing together while the room continued around them. Then he looked up and found Norah in the 4th row. She looked back. After Harbor Light came the Chopin Nocturne. Precise and clean and quietly heartbreaking in the way Chopin gets when the right hands are on it. The room settled back into listening, into the particular concentration of people who have decided to actually be present for something. Then Caleb introduced the final piece. He stood at the microphone, which he had resisted throughout rehearsals and agreed to only because Greer had said quietly that people needed to hear this from him directly. He said, "This last piece is new. I wrote it over the past 6 months. I'm calling it second movement, because every piece of music has more than one part. And this, all of this, is only the beginning of ours." He sat back down, and he played. She understood immediately what he had meant when he said she would understand when she heard it. Second movement built from Harbor Light's themes the way one season builds from the one before it. The same notes, the same intervals, but transformed in meaning. Where Harbor Light spoke of distance and longing, this piece spoke of arrival. Where Harbor Light carried grief, this piece carried memory. Where Harbor Light was one voice reaching towards something it couldn't hold, this piece was 2 voices finding the same place from different directions and recognizing it when they arrived. In the final movement, Ray joined him, a simple counter-melody he'd taught her over 3 months of early mornings at the community center. Her small hands in the lower register, his hands in the upper, imperfect and careful, and together. A father and a daughter building something at a piano the way they'd built everything, by doing it. One day at a time. Starting over when it didn't work. Showing up the next morning anyway, when the last note resolved and the room erupted again. Caleb stood, and Ray stood, and they looked at each other in the way that people look at each other when they've just done something that required courage, and it worked. Then Norah was there. She didn't remember exactly when she'd moved. Just that she was there, and Ray's arms were around her waist before she'd fully arrived, and Caleb was looking at her with the expression she had first seen in the lobby on the night he came back. The expression of a man who has been standing at a door for a very long time and has finally, quietly decided to walk through it. She took his hand, the right one, the scarred one, the one that had survived Cleveland and 3 surgeries and 12 years of quiet work and 6 months of rebuilding. She held it carefully, not protecting it, just holding it. He let her. Around them, the room was still going. 500 people doing what audiences do when they've witnessed something that exceeded what they came expecting. Neither of them said anything. They had said enough. They would say more. There would be time for more. There would be ordinary Tuesdays and disagreements about small things, and mornings when the coffee ran out, and evenings when work ran late, and all the accumulating texture of a life shared between 2 people who had chosen each other with their eyes open. But right now there was just this, his hand in hers, Ray between them, the room still going. It was enough. It was more than enough. Spring came in its own time, the way spring always comes in this city, suddenly and without apology. Replacing gray with green overnight and expecting everyone to simply adjust. The park near the east side had cherry trees along the central path. When they bloomed, they dropped petals for exactly 2 weeks, and the effect was, depending on your disposition, either beautiful or excessive, or both simultaneously. Ray considered it both. She was running ahead on the path the way she always ran, loose and fast, and with the complete confidence of someone who has never met a surface she couldn't navigate. The petals were falling in the light April wind, and she kept reaching up to catch them, and mostly missing and not caring at all. Caleb walked beside Norah, his hand in hers, the natural position of it. The unremarkable, ordinary fact of 2 people walking through a park in April, which had somehow become the most remarkable thing in his life. He kept noticing that, kept being surprised by it. The way happiness surprises you when you've gone without it for long enough that you stopped expecting it to arrive. They heard the music before they saw it. Piano. Live. Drifting from somewhere near the fountain at the path's center. A young man, maybe 19 or 20. A portable keyboard on a folding table, a small speaker beside it, an open case on the ground with a few bills inside. His playing was earnest and unpolished, and there was something in the way he held himself, the slight forward lean, the focus in his face, that Caleb recognized from the inside out. Someone who played because he had to, not because anyone was watching. They stopped near the fountain. Ray stopped running. Came back and stood beside them without being asked. Listening, the young man finished his piece. Looked up, saw them standing there, the reflexive wince of someone bracing for judgment from a stranger who has been listening without their knowledge. Caleb stepped forward. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a folded bill in the corner of the keyboard case. The young man started to say thank you. Caleb shook his head. Keep playing, he said, even when it's hard, even when your hands hurt, even when you think no one's listening and you wonder whether any of it matters. The young man waited. Someone is always listening, Caleb said. You just don't always get to know who. The young man looked at him for a moment. The way young people look at older people when they sense they're receiving something real rather than generic encouragement. He nodded slowly, like a person receiving something they didn't know they needed until it arrived. He turned back to his keyboard and began again, this time with a little more of himself in it, a little less held back. Ray pressed in between Norah and Caleb and took a hand from each of them without asking. They sat down on the fountain's edge. The petals kept falling, the music kept going, and Caleb Hart, who had spent 18 years carrying a love he'd never named to the person it was for, who had lost his career to a decision someone made for money and called it acceptable, who had buried his wife and raised his daughter and fixed the broken things in other people's buildings, and played piano alone on Wednesday mornings when no one was there to hear it. He sat in the April sun with Ray on one side and Norah on the other, and the young man's music moving through the air around them, and the cherry blossoms falling the way they always did, briefly and without apology, and he thought about Harbor Light. About the 8 bars Owen had started with everything he felt for a girl he couldn't find the words for. About the night Caleb had sat alone in a practice room at 20 years old and understood exactly what Owen meant and finished it. About all the distance between that night and this bench. The years and the losses and the long patient accumulation of a life that had not gone the way he'd planned and had given him things he couldn't have planned for. Owen wrote the beginning. He had told Norah once, late in the lobby with the snow against the windows, and she had smiled and said, "He did." And Caleb had said, "I wrote the middle," and she had taken his hand and said, "Then let's write the ending together." He looked at Ray, at Norah, at the young man playing as though the whole park were a concert hall. The ending was still being written by all of them, one measure at a time, not knowing what came next, trusting the melody to carry them there. Above, the clouds shifted and let spring sun paint the path gold for a moment and then moved on. The music continued, the petals fell, and 3 voices hummed without realizing they were humming quietly in the same key, writing their song.